watch it, but the NFL had blocked it.
Oh,
They didn't like
um,
their material.
so yeah, they have, so the thing to do is just search for it independently. They blocked it because it was incorporated within my screen, within my video, which is also on YouTube. So that way they found out. So if that ever happens again, uh, just search and find it yourself on YouTube, and I'll make sure to give enough information so you can find it yourself.
Okay.
And but we're going to watch it again anyway, so um, that'll help you think about it, because I think it's just an interesting video. It's made me think a lot about these. I guess I'd call them social justice advertisements, and that a lot of companies are doing, and you know, how the rhetoric works in those kinds of things, and thinking about you know, how they're persuading. Usually it's a big enough company that they can do it. Okay, so this is Wednesday, February 24th. Somewhere it seems I saw somebody making a request for a PDF of the textbook. I am not doing a PDF after the first chapters. Because you needed those at the beginning. I am not making copies. To do that is a violation of copyright. And the law of fair use allows me to do it for a one-time only for a particular class purposes, but to photocopy the whole textbook would be a violation of, I think it's a moral violation too, because the person has written this book, and they deserve to get the proceeds of the book, and it shouldn't be copied unless they've decided to put it up as a open source under a public commons thing, which is happening more and more. Certainly in the textbook area, it's beginning to happen more and more, because the textbook system has gone out of control and has become too expensive. But that's one of the reasons why I purchased this book. It's just it's not that expensive, and it's helpful to have some of these background readings. Any questions otherwise? So we're going to keep talking about enthymemes today. And oh, I don't want to share. I will share it later. So I'm going to start being very careful about making sure everybody knows where we are in terms of homework. And so the discussion continues until Monday noon. Everybody's started thinking in a good, positive way, using the rhetorical ideas and talking about this Dove commercial. I'm going to be probably doing a little more discussions, both because the content requires a little more kind of working out the thinking about logic more explicitly, and then also because I want to get all the people who can't participate involved in the course more, and make it more of a class. Where we are in the course. So this has been week 6. And we're focusing on the middle section of this textbook, of this chapter. Next week, we'll be focusing on the last section of the textbook, where they introduce the ideas of stasis and topoi. Has anybody heard of stasis theory? Nobody? So you're getting to learn so many new things here. And what we're doing, we're continuing on applying the ideas from our readings to the opinion pieces that we're writing. So in this case, thinking about argumentation, I want you to be thinking about what is the basic argument that you're making? What's the enthymeme you're making? You're making a claim and you're giving a reason. And we're going to talk more about enthymemes, and basically an enthymeme is a claim plus a reason. So you're making a claim plus a reason. So what is that? And you can explain what that is in a, sort of a comment about it. But then I also want you to kind of go through and see if you can, work to make sure that claim and reason is clearly articulated. Now, as we'll talk about today, the enthymeme's not always explicit. There's a presentational enthymeme and an ideational enthymeme. And so you're going to have to think about your audience and your purpose and everything in terms of how much you want to be explicit, how much not, but you should have kind of a sense of what you're trying to say. At the same time, we are going to start another blog in which you pick a piece of rhetoric to analyze. And again, use the rhetorical concepts that we talk about to analyze it. Then at the end of the semester, you are working on these 2 things, and they're more of a practice, exploratory kind of thing to see what happens if you try to be explicit using rhetorical concepts in either writing your opinion piece or in analyzing a piece of rhetoric. And then pick one or the other of them and really polish it up at the end. So one of them is going to be more unfinished than the other. This is fine. Later on, maybe you can do it for something else. And I suggest that you go into this really cool website if you have not to try to find something that you want to analyze. This focuses on speeches, not written texts, but so often we talk about the speeches themselves. And so one of the things is it has this database of and indexed to 5,000 plus full text audio and video versions of public speeches, sermons, legal proceedings, lectures, debates, interviews, other recorded media events, and a declaration or two. And then they also have this special issue, The Rhetoric of 9/11. So of course, every time something happens in the universe, those things usually become part of the course. So back at 9/11, when most of you were in first and second grade or so, if that, probably even younger. We looked a lot at all the rhetoric associated with the rhetoric of 9/11. So, but we haven't thought about it lately. So here's the speech bank. So it's this amazing collection of world leaders, Native American speeches, top 100 speeches. I'm not really sure who decided the top 100. Oh, according to a list compiled by these two professors at University of Wisconsin. Top 100 speeches by rank. I Have a Dream being number 1. JFK's inaugural address, number 2. So any of these things would be really cool to analyze that have been identified as top speeches. They took the same one by date. And it's just kind of interesting to see what number those are. So the 1900s, the 1911s, the 10s or teens, the 20s, the 30s, 40s, 50s. It seems like there's more and more. I don't know if we're getting better speakers or just, I suspect it has to do with us remembering because these are just opinions. And then there's a top 100 speeches by women. And how they ranked in the top 100. So this is the top 100, and then which ones of them are women, and it looks like it's about, I don't know, a quarter, 25 maybe. They have by different, the presidents, they have movie speeches, which are usually really well done. They have most requested Jan. What does that mean? In January, maybe? This site also does have some academic material. So we've got Aristotle on rhetoric and some key quotes by Aristotle. This is just for background. And they have quizzes and other kinds of things. So this would be a possible place to start. Of course, if you have somebody if you have a piece of writing that you really like, that would be a place to start too. And if you can't come up with anything, I'll certainly try to help you find something. People are always posting things on social media, sharing things on social media that they really like. That might be something. You can analyze. It doesn't have to be a speech. It doesn't have to be a written text. It could be, a TV show or a movie or a video game. Anything that you're interested. you could analyze the rhetorical concepts in it. Anybody have any questions about that? So I just want you to start thinking about it, because next week I'm going to ask you to have made a decision by a week from today. Just a decision on what to analyze, and then we'll do the blogs as we go on. Back to the schedule. Also, as we end up the argumentation unit, 2 weeks from now, we'll have another quiz. So I want to talk today about the enthymeme, continue talking about the enthymeme. As I said in class on Monday, it's a reduced syllogism. The syllogism is that logical deductive argument that if the two premises that you start with are true, then the conclusion will be inevitable and also true. If it's constructed in if it's a valid syllogism. So if you have a statement like, all men are mortal, that's a major premise, a generalization, and then a minor premise, Socrates is a man. That's a minor premise. It's a piece of data. It's a fact. Notice that it's talking about something, Socrates, and it uses one of the terms of the major premise, that is men or man. And then if it is valid and if both premises are true, then you have to come to the conclusion that Socrates is mortal. But and that's a syllogism, and of course they get more complicated. And philosophers use a syllogism to talk about valid and invalid arguments, and logical and illogical arguments, and truth and non-truth. And philosophers in general are interested in, what is true. But in rhetoric, Aristotle says, we don't have to go through all the formal steps of the syllogism. We can just have parts of the syllogism to make our argument. It may work, it may not work. And because of the gaps, the parts that we omit, it may not work, but it certainly can. So the enthymeme is what's used in rhetoric, in persuasion, in any kind of argument of any kind. And it relies on an understood knowledge of the audience. And it invites and expects the audience to fill in the blanks. So I talked more about the expects the audience to fill in the blanks, but it also invites the audience to fill in the blanks, in the sense that it kind of depends on the type of argument, but it's sort of, you have to supply a missing premise. And depending on the context, you may have to be more active or not. So basically we're talking about, the blanks, the things that aren't there. And way back when I showed you, we looked at that diagram that the textbook had, and they talked about presuppositions. So this is where we get at the presuppositions. So that reducing of the syllogism, we're reducing because all these presuppositions are not said. And in Toulmin's terms, those presuppositions are warrants. The unstated premise that you must believe to get from the statement to the conclusion. So these are two common forms, and the textbook goes over that, and so does the video that I showed, that I included, and the little lecture I did over in Blackboard. But there's two common forms. You have a claim because of a reason. So marry me because I will be rich. Claim plus reason. Or you can switch it around and say the data, so the claim. In other words, piece of facts and then leading to a claim. I will take care of you, so marry me. Now, and they could, each of them could be reversed, you know, marry me because I will take care of you, or I will be rich, so marry me. Claim plus reason, reason plus claim, or data plus claim. And obviously, these little arguments will work only if there is a certain warrant that is held by the audience. So what is the warrant that the person must have to be convinced to marry me because I will be rich? What's that warrant? I'm asking this for everybody.
That being rich is a reason to marry someone.
Yeah, that you believe, you know, whoever you is. So there's a understood you, that you believe that being rich is a good reason for somebody to marry. Obviously, if that's not your value, then this will not be very persuasive. Or maybe you'll be convinced that this should be persuasive. So one of the things that happens with logic is all of these premises are arguable. So you might end up arguing that it's a good reason that is a good reason, and then start giving reasons for why it's good to get married if you're going to be rich. This gets at that epicurean that they were talking about in the textbook, because there's always these chains of argument. Likewise, what is the warrant for I will take care of you, so marry me?
You get married to be taken care of?
You're getting married to be taken care of. And again, if that's not your value system, then it's not going to be very persuasive. You know, and if it's not your value system, you'll say, well, so, you know, duh. Or I don't want you to take care of me, you know. I want to marry somebody who we can be independent together. So obviously,
I'm an independent woman.
Yes, yes. So obviously, I picked these two to point out how these kinds of things will work if there's a shared value between speaker and audience. And when they fall apart, it's because, you know, there's some kind of gap in the understanding or the shared values. I've heard in marriage counseling that sometimes people are told that it's really important sometimes to make things explicit, because if you don't make things explicit, the other person will fill in the blanks with their worst possible fears. And so sometimes you have to make things explicit. So sometimes using just an enthymeme will be a problem. And you have to articulate things more clearly. So summarizing what we just said, that this, and the idea of the warrant is the idea of the premise that you must hold in order for a little enthymeme like this to work. The warrant for marry me because I'll be rich is you want someone who is rich. The warrant for someone for I will take care of you, so marry me is you want someone who will take care of you. And this, of course, works in rhetoric. So on page 83 in the book, where they're analyzing MLK's letter, and they're kind of looking at sort of the chaining argument that he does. They say, there is injustice in Birmingham. That's what MLK says. And so he says, so I must go to Birmingham. And what I should have done is make this transition in, so I don't state the warrant, but I did. So what's the warrant? He doesn't say, I must go where there is injustice, but he implies that wherever there's injustice, I must go. Now that's an interesting statement. I must go where there is injustice. Where does that come from? So that's a new claim, which itself is backed by reasoning. And in Toulmin, he calls them backings. So what is the warrant, in other words, for the state, for the warrant that he must go wherever there is injustice? Well, his warrant is his Christian teachings. And he says, as a preacher of the gospel, I must imitate the prophets. The prophets and Paul left their towns to speak God's word wherever it was called for. So I must speak God's word wherever it's called for. So you see how the argument is going, and I will, this is how sermons tend to work all the time. The preacher is saying, this is something that you have to do. And the reason is because this is what our faith community says. Often it's citing texts in the Bible. I've heard a lot of Protestant speeches, and it's like they just cite this text, and they don't even explain it. They just cite, Matthew 16, blah, blah, blah. And when they do that, again, there's a warrant right there, and there's a whole lot of unstated things. They're assuming their audience knows when they say Matthew 6, I'm just pulling numbers out of the blue because I don't know anything about it. They're assuming that their audience knows what was said in Matthew 6, or if they don't, they will go read it. So that's one of those cases of inviting the audience to fill in the blanks and go try to understand more. And that will be the backing for this whole argument. Why do I do it? Because that's what Jesus did. In fact, that what would Jesus do saying is basically an enthymeme. That is, you should do what Jesus would do because, you're a believer in Christianity. So the backing was that Jesus and Paul and the prophets, they all went where there was injustice. And because they all went for where there was injustice, and they went out and tried to help and solve those problems, then we should all go out and solve those problems. And that's how he's making his argument. Of course, he's making an argument to a bunch of moderate white ministers. And so he can assume that when he alludes and refers or implies various religious quotations or stories, then his audience will understand and be at least invited to think, well, gosh, if I believe in that, if I believe that I need to be like the prophets and Paul going out to injustice, maybe I need to go out to injustice, or maybe I can understand why Martin Luther King goes to fight injustice. So sermons are, as I said, a good place to see how the enthymeme works. I'm Jewish. I don't know how many of you are very familiar with Jewish things, but that's why I'm picking this. So I heard my rabbi did a sermon last Friday called "Be a Purim Jew and Be a Passover Jew." So what are the missing presuppositions? How many of you know what Purim and Passover are?
I know what Passover is. I don't know what the other one is.
So what's Passover?
There we go. I know isn't it a holiday?
Yeah, it's a holiday.
It's a holiday, but it's like celebrated in springtime, kind of.
It's celebrated in springtime around the time of Easter.
Yeah.
And in fact,
I hate to admit it, but the only reason I know of this is like when I was a kid, I know there was a Rugrats episode where it talked about Passover, and that's the only reason I know this. And I don't know why I'm admitting this now, but here we are.
Yes, Rugrats has several Jewish holiday episodes. So obviously, this sermon is only going to work to people who know what Purim and Passover are. So there's a whole lot of missing enthymemes. Passover is the holiday that's usually around the same time as Easter. In fact, this year, the week of Passover is the week between Good Friday, Palm Sunday, and Easter. I think the first night of Passover is the Saturday before Palm Sunday. And that's because both Passover and Easter developed out of spring festivals originally, and are connected to the moon system. Now, the Jewish calendar is a little different than the Western calendar, and so the dates don't match exactly because, but they're around the same time. Purim actually starts tomorrow, and it is usually around the same time as Mardi Gras. Again, because it's based on an old festival that I really should say Ash Wednesday. So Mardi Gras is just the popular holiday that happens before Ash Wednesday. So Ash Wednesday is a certain number of weeks before Easter. And then Purim is a certain number of times before Passover, although it's not tied to Passover, it's tied to the lunar calendar, but that's, since that lunar calendar keeps going, it's always around the same time. Anyway, so Passover is the story of the Jews' escape from Egypt into freedom. Moses takes the Israelites out of Egypt, and they go across the desert for 40 years and 40 nights, and they land in the Promised Land. The story of Passover is based on the word Passover comes from one of the things that happens in Passover, which is that God makes a bunch of plagues against the Egyptians to make them let the Jews go because they were slaves. And there's frogs and boils and
Doesn't it rain blood at one point or something crazy?
blood
Yeah.
and bad weather and etc. But the last of and the Pharaoh keeps saying, okay, I'll let them go. And then he changes his mind. So God gives him another plague and then
Just like take your firstborn or something.
The last one is the killing of the firstborn. And what they do is all the Jewish homes, they mark with something, blood maybe. And so the angel of death passes over the Jewish homes and does not kill the firstborn. And so Pharaoh finally says, okay, you convinced me. There's an enthymeme. Let the Jews go or else I will bring this plague. And it doesn't work until it's the killing of the firstborn. So Passover celebrates freedom, the escape from slavery and of Egypt. But part of this Passover ceremony also celebrates, reminds us that we were strangers in Egypt, and we know what it's like to be strangers in Egypt. And so you, all Jews, must also help the strangers. And so one of the things that happens in the dinner celebration, which is called a Seder, is you feel bad for the killing of the firstborn of the Egyptians. So we have some it's not guilt, it's compassion for the Egyptians. But that was what was necessary at that time, back on those days. Okay, so that's Passover. Purim, on the other hand, is the story of Esther and Haman. And those of you who are involved in Christian things probably have heard both about Passover and Purim, just not in this context. Because these are part of the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament. So Purim is a story of Esther. There's a whole book of Esther. And Esther is in a time when the Jews were living they were basically assimilated in the Greek, well, I think it was the Assyrian culture. And but then there was a bad guy named Haman who didn't like the Jews, and he was trying to convince the king to kill all the Jews. Unbeknownst to the king, his queen Esther was Jewish, and so Esther's uncle Mordecai convinces Esther to speak up and not hide her Judaism and save the Jews from this anti-Semitic Haman. Okay, all this background. So there's a lot of missing presuppositions. Now, when my rabbi started saying this, I knew all that, but I didn't really have any idea what in the world he meant by be a Purim Jew and be a Passover Jew. I mean, you know, I had no kind of concept about that. And basically he was using some other person's idea. It's an idea that somebody came up with. But so he ends up, so when he starts, I have no real idea of what he's talking about, but basically by saying there's a Purim Jew and a Passover Jew, he's inviting me to think about what that could mean. And then he explains as he goes on, the Purim Jew is the one, like Esther, who protects us from anti-Semitism. Most of the stories of Judaism, of the Jewish history, are of the four. There's a joke, and the rabbi started with this. There's a joke. All of Jewish holidays are of the same form. They tried to kill us. We ended up winning. Let's eat. And so basically, all the stories of many of the religions and stories of Judaism are of that sort of form. But he says, you know, the Purim one is a different one than the Passover. The Purim one is a focus on stopping anti-Semitism, stopping, you know, being aware of what's going on. Noticing if your society is trying to hurt you. This post-Second World War is a real big thing because, I mean, the Jews in Europe totally didn't notice as it started when Hitler began his whole process. They just weren't aware, or they didn't believe. They were too naive. They thought it would work out. And then once it became obvious, it was too late. Sitting here in the United States, we could say the same thing. The American Jews and the American country, they just weren't paying attention. So to be a Purim Jew is to be alert and aware of potential threats to our culture so that we can continue to survive. And that is a necessary thing. But to be a Passover Jew, he says, is to go one step further, as to take our awareness of being under threat or under siege or attacked or of anti-Semitism and project that outward towards everybody else so that we you know, try to support and move towards social justice in the world. Now, I will say that I'm a Reform Jew, which is a certain group. Other Jewish groups will have a slightly different argument. This is definitely a Reform Jew point of view. But so there was an enthymeme in there, be a Purim Jew and a Passover Jew, and the sermon itself filled in those blanks. Of course, it relied on the audience knowing enough about Purim and Passover in order for everything to make sense. Because if you had to stop and give background information like I had to stop with you guys, you never get anywhere, you know. I mean, we can never explain everything. The textbook talks about presentational enthymemes versus ideational enthymemes. And I think that's a good concept to think about, because the presentational enthymeme is what's explicit. So the rabbi says, you know, do this, you know, be a Purim Jew, be a Passover Jew. And what he means is a whole series of sort of logical statements that are, some of which are explained and some of which are assumed. And when you talk about an advertisement, for example, there's a presentation in the advertisement, but there is a set of ideas that are implicit and then they're underlying it that may not actually be presented. And so, you know, that they mean because of all the implications that happen from within the enthymemes because of the various warrants that are floating around there. And, you know, we can, and this is where, you know, how people end up getting so misunderstood, I think, is because then we have people, you know, saying what they say, making an argument. And then below that, in some sense, there's what they mean. And then there's what they mean to mean, so that they may intend to say something, but somehow not quite end up saying it. And then there's the problem of the audience making inferences about what they think the audience he means. So there's so many layers going on. I mean, communication is so amazing. It's amazing when you start thinking about it, that, you know, we ever get anything done because there's so much stuff going on out there. But the reality is it does go out there. So I've been thinking about these ads that I've been asking you to look at. And remember with that diagram about the rhetorical situation, you have a rhetor, and then you also have an implied rhetor that is created by the original rhetor. And you see this, of course, in written things. So there's a real author in something written, but then there's an implied author that is a construct of the thing. So the Martin Luther King creates an implied rhetor, an implied Martin Luther King voice in his letter from Birmingham jail. And it's pretty close probably to, you know, there's not that much of a distance. But when we start getting into fiction or various sort of strategies, there may be a real big difference. And so that's one of the things you see in these ads. So the rhetor creates the implied rhetor, and in any dramatic argument, it's not only that the rhetor is creating a text, but they're creating this dramatic argument. They're creating stories and they're creating characters. And they're using the characters and the story and the actors to make the argument. But then the rhetor uses that to make its argument. So we have Alexa, the Alexa ad that I asked you to look at in the quiz. And so we have speakers in it. We have Jeff Bezos, we have the people working at Amazon, we have the actors playing substitute voices for Alexa. And those actors in many cases aren't real people, they're characters that they play. You know, they were kind of acting out the known characters. So it's very complicated series of frames within frames for the writer to use it to make its argument. So here's where I want to go back and look at the Super Bowl ad. And let's think about the enthymeme that the NFL is saying. What is the NFL's argument?
Football is a microcosm of America. All races, religions, living, playing, competing side by side. I pray we dedicate ourselves to be the best team we can be. Let's choose to be for one another, to fulfill the promise of one nation, to be part of the solution, be part of the change, to try harder, show up, dive in, and stay at it.
Oh, can we touch for a second? Be us for a second. No matter what I give it to, my love looks better on you.
Resize window to display more participants. All right. So this is an ad from the NFL. So the NFL, I mean, one thing we have to acknowledge is that an ad from the NFL is an ad to support the NFL. So they are arguing, support the NFL. What are the reasons they're giving to support the NFL?
Because they're supporting the fight in systemic racism.
Right? Support the NFL because they're supporting the fight to end systemic racism. So what's the warrant in that argument?
That people care about the NFL?
That, I'm sorry, what?
That people care about the NFL?
Is that what the warrant is for that argument? Support the NFL because they care about systemic racism. What do you have to believe to be convinced to support the NFL from that?
That they're acknowledging that there is systemic racism and taking it seriously, at least.
Well, that's what they're doing. They're presenting that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what are they? In order for you to be convinced to support the NFL, what do you have to believe?
But we should all be doing something to remedy racism, systemic racism.
Exactly. If you don't care about systemic racism, if you know, if you think this is an issue that's not important to you, then the fact that the NFL cares about it, big deal. So you have to believe that ending systemic racism is important for you to be convinced to support the NFL. Now, you also have to believe that NFL really does work to end is really working. And that gets at kind of the sort of cynical comment that Micah made in class last time, which is, where were they when Colin Kaepernick first started taking a knee? They were awfully negative, and they certainly didn't acknowledge the problems he was trying to raise. In fact, they ended up, he ended up without a job. So the basic argument that, in terms of the ultimate claim of any advertisement, any advertisement has to be at its deepest level, support or buy this product, whatever the thing is. And the reason they're giving here is that because they support systemic racism, that's the reason. And the warrant is, it's important for people to, I agree that all organizations, big organizations, something like football, ought to end systemic racism. If we switch that argument around to the other way, so the NFL is working to end systemic racism, so you should support the NFL. You can look at those two different claims or premises, maybe. The NFL is working to support systemic racism. So that's the data. Is that true? Does everybody agree with it? Maybe not. So that in itself is an argument that could be argued or debated. Now, what do they try to provide as evidence that they are working to end systemic racism just in the ad? What kind of evidence do they give that they're ending systemic racism?
That they're committed to donating money. It showed him talking to law enforcement, helping out at a Boys and Girls Club.
Putting the names of murdered
Yeah.
people on their helmets, making you feel emotional about, when they all take a knee at the flag. So all those pieces in the ad are part of the backing of that premise, the support for that premise, which itself, as I said, could be arguable. So when we think of the rhetor as the NFL, their claim is support the NFL because it works towards justice. And the warrant is you want to support things that work towards justice. Of course, the argument is also the other way. And this actually connects to what Heather said. Work toward justice because the NFL works towards justice. That's also, I think, an argument that they're making. How does that work? What's the warrant? What's the unstated value?
That the NFL is important. You should
That
follow their line of thinking, or
that you, like Heather said, you appreciate what the NFL believes. It's important to you that they're a leader in some way. You're going to work towards justice because the NFL works towards justice. and possibly that's convinced people. You know, I mean, when the NFL is dismissing, you know, these activists like Colin Kaepernick, and other than the people watching the NFL are feeling, okay, yeah, that's stupid. We're not going to do that. But if the NFL on every Sunday in the normal year keeps saying we are working towards justice, maybe all the football fans are going to be convinced to work towards justice. This is an argument by ethos, right? So the redder is the NFL, and they're making an argument, work towards justice. And they're saying work towards justice because we're working towards justice. And that's an argument by ethos. You know, you trust me, you have credibility in me in this entity. And so I've been, you know, we all know that ads often, you know, they'll have famous people in them, and there's an argument by ethos. So you might have buy Crest toothpaste because it'll get your teeth white. So there's a very direct argument by logos. Buy Crest toothpaste because 9 out of 10 dentists recommend Crest toothpaste. There's an argument by ethos, by credibility. Buy Crest toothpaste because your loved one will think you're more beautiful, and you know, people will be shocked at how white your teeth are. Not shocked, but they will love how white your teeth are. There's an argument more by pathos, especially if you have an ad, and I've seen plenty of them, you know, where they, you know, show people being attracted by the ad. So I've been interested in these, I don't know what to call them. There's probably a term out there. It's social justice ads. These ads where corporations, they don't sell their product explicitly. The presentation is not at all the product. So like the Dove's Love Your Body campaign, which I asked you to look at, is, you know, they never say buy Dove, it'll make your skin softer. Buy Dove, you know, you'll be more beautiful if you wear Dove, use Dove. Instead, it's this whole, you know, your mother's body is beautiful. And it actually was part of the whole Dove's Love Your Body campaign. And particularly a campaign to urge people, you know, focused on young girls and, you know, the concern people have about sort of body dysphoria and not liking the way they look because of the whole beauty industry telling us that we have to look in a certain way, and none of us fitting in that perfect way. So they came up with this whole campaign, and you know, this is actually part of on their Dove website, and many of these large corporations have adopted these kinds of things. And so you'll see these ads, and in fact, all this whole campaign, they never say buy Dove. They are, I think, trying to say buy Dove because they're making an argument that because it's a good company, you know, that realizes that beauty is not these unreasonable expectations that we have, et cetera. We don't have time to look at this, but you can, I'll post the video. I'll post both the slideshow and the video, and you can click on this. So this was about 6 pivotal social justice ads of 2020. And these are great for thinking also about Kairos, about how they all develop their ads based on the timing. So we have Nike, Starbucks, etc. Don't have time to talk about Alexa, but we will maybe next time. Because I think it's interesting to think about humorous ads. So, I mean, how does the Alexa lost her voice ad work? You know, that are funny. So ultimately the ad is buy Alexa. And how does the argument work? How do they get from Alexa lost her voice to, and all these funny substitutes, to the unstated thing, which is buy Alexa? Okay, so back to the end of the session here, and what we're working on. Start looking for something to analyze. Read the third part of chapter 3, which will introduce yet another concept, this idea. I'm going to focus mainly on stasis and not topoi. I think topoi just gets too detailed, but stasis, I think, is a very useful concept for argument. And keep working on the discussion. So, I did a lot of talking, I'm sorry. Questions, comments?
Yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what you want us to do in the discussion?
I want you, well, what people are doing is fine. Just, you know, think through all the ideas and what they mean. I guess, let's see, go back.
Were you wanting us to try to be interactive and comment on each other's postings?
Yes, I hope so. So, you know, the first part was everybody to do the same one. And I want you to, you know, pay attention to what each other has written. And, you know, you will probably be saying similar things, but if you notice that somebody has said something that you haven't thought about, go ahead and comment. Part 2, to complete before class on Monday, complete the same analysis on one of the commercials used during the Super Bowl 2020. And I did double check that the link work. By the way, if you ever have a situation where I've given you a link and it doesn't work, like Heather mentioned at the beginning of class, let me know and I will try to fix it. So start a new thread for this part and read each other's posts and add additional ideas to at least 2 students' posts. So I want you to comment on what everybody says. When you do your post, make sure you're saying you tell us which ad you're doing, so that they can go back and look for it. So here's another, there was another NFL ad, a little different. And of course, there are lots of comic ones as well. And the little commentary does kind of help you think about it. But so, does that answer your question, Jay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your help.
So I want you to you know, it shouldn't just be a bunch of monologues. It should try to be a discussion.
Okay.
Other questions, comments? Sure is nice outside. What a change.
It's false spring. I don't trust it. It's gonna go away and it's gonna get really cold again out of nowhere.
You're such a negative person. You're
No, it's what Arkansas does. It's got
though.
like it's got winter and then there's fall spring and then there's a cold snap, so it kills everything again, and then it's spring for 2 weeks and then it's summer.
It gets your hopes up and then it knocks you flat.
You know, my daffodils, I think, were killed by the snow. I mean, they were already coming up, and now, so I think I read in the paper that they will come back next year, but they won't come back this year. So, I was a little sad. We have dogs that live outside, and you know, they don't, I mean, I'm allergic to them, so they can't live in the house, but you know, we'll let them inside periodically. When they were young, their goal in life was to get inside. Although once they got inside, they try to go run out the front door. They're beagles and they're 17 years old. So they're a little slower than they were, but so they live outside. We made them, they have a sort of a dog house that's made out of clear plastic. Either in a corner, we put extra layers, extra foam down, and we used a heat lamp in there. And they were cozy and happy. I could not believe it. Sometimes they had icicles hanging from their body and they were okay, I guess. So I was afraid every morning, though, to look. So, all right, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Have fun, go outside, exercise. If it does get cold again, you might not have a chance again. No. Bye.
Bye.